All right. Let me make sure that we are recording. I think we are. Yes, we are. Praise the Lord. I'm going to go ahead and start, and if I have to stop every once in a while and admit folks into the meeting. All right, so I'm going to have to keep my eye here on our little participant panel so I can make sure I'm admitting people, excuse me, as they're requesting to come into the meeting. But let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jenny Humann, and most of the folks here today are part of the faith community that we're affiliated with, as we're Church of God ministers, my husband and I, and we here we go, admit that person. We run a ministry called Jacob's Generation, and that was in the intro, so if you all received that, you have all that information. But we're part of the Church of God ministry to the military. Now, my paying gig over the past, since 2009, has been as a grant writer. And so, all right. Sorry, I'm going to have to pause every once in a while and make sure I'm letting people into the meeting. Let me just explain that a little bit. I have worked in ministry since 1993 as a volunteer, and then full-time since 2000, running the Children, Youth, and Family Department for ministry to the military. And we now do that worldwide in 7 different countries. So we work with Americans that are in the military and the government civilians that support them, primarily abroad, also in the USA. And so I realized we've got a lot of folks here from all different areas of the United States and overseas. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between domestic grants here in the USA and also grants for overseas ministries. So if you fall into one category or the other, don't be irritated that we're having to address both in order to make sure that everyone is receiving the information that they need to receive. But it's since 2000, I've been working in ministry, and then I began to work in a nonprofit in Salina, Kansas in 2007. That's when my husband was stationed at Fort Riley. He wasn't there. That was the only duty station he never lived at. He was in Iraq for a year and a half. So as soon as he got back from Iraq, he got sent to Washington, D.C., working for the chief of staff. And so he never lived in Fort Riley, Kansas, but the kids and I did for 2 years. So I took a job at a nonprofit. If I had to have a paying job on the side, it needed to be something that was meaningful to me. And it's a child welfare organization that had about 50 different programs. Now, it was a faith-based organization. And so I think that equipped me especially for being able to research and write grants that were both for government, private foundation, corporate grants, because we applied for all of it and we're eligible for all of it. So we're going to go through a little bit of that. I first began just writing for the organization, publications and articles and things like that in the marketing department. In 2009, they eliminated their marketing department and outsourced. So I was on the chopping block to get laid off. And honestly, I was just really excited about getting laid off because I was really tired and I really wanted to just get an unemployment check and sleep for a while. That didn't happen. They asked me to take a position as a grant writer and to just telework from Washington, D.C. Now, that was really strategic because Washington, D.C. really has become the hub of all things nonprofit grant related. So I did my training for my job at the Foundation Center. And I will be referring to the Foundation Center frequently. They have merged with another organization and now they're known as Candid. But it is the Foundation Center. That is really the gold standard in nonprofit research. So there are, I get this question all the time, are there other organizations like Grantmanship Center, and there's all different ones out there that you can use? Yes. But Foundation Center Online, FDO, Foundation Center Online, is the gold standard. All right, I'd admit one more person, is the gold standard because they were one of the first, one of the only to go into this. What they do, they're a nonprofit organization that serves as a liaison between the foundations that have the money, the charitable trusts, family foundations, all of that, and the people who need it, the nonprofit organizations that need it. They comb through all of the tax forms that are filed. So every foundation at the end of their tax year needs to file something called a 990 PF. The PF stands for private foundation. They're required by law to do that. After 12 months, that's public information, and Foundation Center grabs it and populates their system with that information. What that does is it gives us a breakdown of who has granted what money to whom in the past. So it allows us to get a good snapshot of where their loyalties lie. What do they want to fund? They help us find out like who is getting money that's in a similar organization to the one that we're searching for, and how can we be eligible for those funds. So grant writing is very competitive. It's a lot of work. I'm going to go through beginning, maybe some things you already know, but I don't want to skip over something that somebody doesn't know that's foundational. So I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I'm going to be going through a handbook that I wrote, understanding different kinds of grants. And so I'd ask you as we go along to get a paper and a pen and write down your questions, because probably 99% of your questions will be answered as we go through this material. But if not, then you'll be able to answer it at the end. All right, understanding different kinds of grants. So what is a grant? A grant is free money. Yay, that's our favorite kind. We like the free money. The difficulty is folks have, especially in the faith community, this idea that there's a million strings attached, and that people, these funders, will be able to manipulate your ministry because they've given you money. Now, is there a hair of truth to that? Yes. There are definitely, if people give you their money, they're going to expect reports. They're going to expect you to do the things you said you were going to do. So there are some strings attached, but very few. And I'm going to tell you about how to work with the organizations that are going to give you the fewest strings so that you can get on with your work without being buried in reports and without having to jump through a million different hoops. So the different categories of grants. We all know the federal government gives grants. The question I get is, you know, faith-based organizations would never want to apply to the government for grants. I don't know that that's true. At the organization I worked for and several others that I consulted for and helped, they are faith-based organizations that have received government grants. And there is a way to walk that fine line, but we're not going to go into that directly today. I think for the purpose of the folks that are here, we're not going to talk too much about government grants. You can receive them. Just keep this in your mind if you see a government grant that, and when I say grant, I mean like a request for proposal. If that's put out saying, hey, we're going to be offering this funding, and you think that you qualify for it, read through it, comb through it, and then get some professional advice before you go into it, to make sure that the government won't be able to interfere with the work that you're doing, that you're going to be able to check the block and keep doing that. But also don't omit yourself from that conversation, because why should every secular cause get funded when our taxpayer money is going there too? You know, why shouldn't we receive some of that back as well? So they can't discriminate against you for being a Christian organization. If you are a faith-based organization, it's illegal for them to discriminate against you, but they may have extra rules about what you can and can't do with those funds. Federal government gives out grants. The state gives out grants. The county that you're in, if you are serving in a United States county, will give out grants. The city will give out grants. In fact, if you're doing any kind of after-school program, I just had a call from my hometown, from the high school there that does an after-school program for inner-city kids. They would be eligible for what we would call Section 888 funds. And a lot of states have that same code. That is the sin tax, the alcohol, tobacco tax that that things are taxed. They're made to give money back, and those tax dollars are going towards prevention program. So we're preventing kids from getting addicted to alcohol by taxing the people who are buying the alcohol. But you would be allowed to use that to have some sort of awareness program and like an after-school program. So you could use those funds, and it would not conflict with your purpose. So we did get those funds before. And then you have your judicial districts. If you are doing any kind of like family therapy, and I know some of you are, marriage or abuse in the home or neglect, or there's a substance abuse like alcoholism or drug use, and the kids are still in the home, the state is not going to want to remove those kids if at all possible. They're going to want to do a prevention or intervention program. And as a faith-based organization, if you're a counselor, you are eligible for those funds to say, I'm doing, family therapy, and here's what I offer. And you would be eligible for those judicial district funds, because if a child is delinquent from school, about to be placed in foster care, the government would rather give the judicial district money to put them through your program to help that family than to have that kid go into foster care, where the cost is outrageous to the government, but it's also very detrimental to the child. If there's any way to help them, you as a faith-based organization would be allowed to do that. Not everyone on this call is from a faith-based organization, but probably 90%. So that's why I'm referring to us that way. All right. So don't discount government grants. I've received every single one of those categories for the people that I've applied for. My very last grant, my very last day as a business, I had applied for a federal grant, and that federal grant was about $7.5 million. I did not get that granted, and I was so heartbroken. It took 6 weeks of my life, literally day and night, writing that grant. However, the state that organization was part of received the grant. That state Health and Human Services received the grant. So I reapplied to the state because they were re-granting it out to other organizations. And we received the grant on the last day I was in office. We received an award for $5 million over a 5-year period. So it was $1 million a year. And that was a really good way to end my career with that organization, was the very last day in the office, receiving the notification that we'd won $5 million. So, and that was a program for family prevention, preventing kids from going to foster care by helping families that are in crisis, either economic or relationship crisis, or there's just a plethora of things, but it was a faith-based organization that received those funds. All right, corporate. I'm going to be very short with this one. Back in the Wild West days, when the railroad was built and it passed through Dodge City, Kansas, and all those crazy, Abilene, Kansas, and all those areas that, were the shoot 'em up towns, they were building the railroad, and there were YMCAs in those areas. And so all the railroad folks would stay at the YMCAs while they're working on the railroad, and they'd stay there for 4 to 6 weeks while they're working on that section. Then they would go to the next area, stay at the YMCA. The problem was they depleted a year's worth of support from that YMCA in just a month or two. And so the YMCA went to Union Pacific and said, look, it's not fair for us to have supported your people when you're not supporting us back. And they said, it's your corporate responsibility. So you might want to make a note of that word, that phrase, corporate responsibility, to help us out. So Union Pacific, they decided that a percentage of all of their income, their profit at least, would go towards the communities that they run through. And they began what we now know as corporate responsibility. Every organization or corporation of a certain size is going to give back to their community. Have you walked into Target or Walmart or a grocery store and said, this is how we give back to our community? And there's different pictures on the wall. And you're thinking, how did I get a piece of that? You know, why is our picture not up on the wall? We do good stuff. Well, it can be. There's some that are large, they're national organizations, and if you have a big program, they may give to you nationally. Might be a regional company, it might be only in one state, or it might just be a local business. And I'm just going to use the Walmart Foundation because I think it's the lowest hanging fruit for you all. If you are working in the United States, in the area you're working at, you can go on to walmart.com and search down at the bottom for corporate responsibility and go to their grant site. They have a specific grant site. You can apply to that local store for a grant of up to $3,000 last time I checked. That doesn't mean that you need to ask for $3,000. If your project is only $4,000, they're not going to want to give you, 3/4 of your project total, but they may give you $500 or $1,000, which will give you a nice head start. So remember to ask, and we'll go through that a little bit later, of how much you should ask for, but you need to look at how much they usually give and how much your project is and kind of come up with a number there. And 25% is a good place to land. They want to know that you're going to a lot of different sources for your funding. All right, so Walmart is a great funder for faith-based organizations. They really do well with the local area stores. If you're in a city that has 3 or 4 Walmarts, you can apply to each and every one of those stores as a separate grant. They may or may not even talk to each other. So if you asked $500 from each store, you have 4 stores, that's half your project budget if your project is $4,000. So, that's a good place to go. Walmart also has state grants. It's possible, but you need to show them that your breadth is more than one city or one county, that you are serving multiple areas of the state. All right, so we're going to skip past corporate because that can get a little complex, and we're going to go to my favorite one. This is private foundations, private, family, individual, or trust. They're less technical, they're less difficult to get grants through, and they're more likely to grant you over and over and over again. Wouldn't you love to know that there's a foundation that's going to give you X amount of dollars every year as long as you don't mess up? Well, that has happened and can happen for you, and it really is the goal. So most, but not all, publish what they call their guidelines. In fact, all of the above, the corporate grants, they publish guidelines. The government will publish guidelines as well. That's a how-to book of what they will and won't fund, how you can and can't approach them. But we're going to look at some of those guidelines later so you know how to look those up. They grant for a variety of purposes, typically. And it's important for you to look closely at what those purposes are. Do not try to convince them to give to something that they don't want to give to. Don't spend your time on that. When I do grant research, I mark the foundations either green, yellow, or red based on a traffic light. If it's red, I'm just gonna forget about them, folks. I just need to keep that research so I don't forget that I already looked them up. If it's yellow, it might be not a great fit for us, but if I have any extra time, which I never do, but if I did, I might try to work with them and convince them and maybe get a hold of somebody there and explain what we do and see if I can get the door open. The green is a good fit. So the green are the priority ones that we're going to go for, and we're going to put that on our grant calendar because they'll tell you when they're going to allow you to apply. So if there's somebody that's taking proposals April 1st, you need to get that in right now. Or you're going to have to wait until April 1st, 2022. Most foundations their board members are the ones that read these grants, and they meet quarterly. Some meet twice a year, some only meet once in a year and consider grants. So it's really important that you look at that deadline date and that you write that down so you don't miss an opportunity. They're also only going to let you apply once in a calendar year. So even if they do look at grants quarterly, if you blew it because you had a badly prepared proposal, they're probably not going to look at you again that year. So it's just a faux pas to keep applying to them after you've kind of messed up. So you need to give them a year to consider your next proposal. Some, but not all, will give you feedback. If they declined your proposal, they may tell you why. Probably 80% don't ever tell you why. And so you're just left sad and questioning and scratching your head. All right, but they also have a geographic focus. Almost all of them do. They will tell you where they're going to fund. And this is really important because we have folks from the seminary over there in the Philippines. We have folks from Europe, and we have folks from the USA that are on this call today. They will tell you where they grant. So if you're doing work specifically in Europe and they do not grant outside of the 50 states of America, don't apply to them, because you can also look and see, have they ever made an exception? You can go through their history and see, did they ever make an exception? Did they ever give to anybody in Europe? If not, it's not worth your time. You're not going to convince them to do it. Also, because this geographic focus thing has been my Achilles heel, because we do ministry overseas, but we also work with Americans. So we fall in this gray area where it's very, very difficult to get grants, because they might give it to us if we were working with Europeans in Europe or Asians in Asia, but no, because we're working with Americans in these foreign countries, we fall into the zone where we don't get a lot of grants that way. So that's been the most difficult thing about me being a grant writer, is I've gotten less grants for my own organization than any other that I've helped. So just the very nature of the very unique ministry that we do. But look at their geographic focus. If you fall into that focus, then they're a good prospect for you. You'll hear me using the word prospect, because it is called prospect research. And just think of that, panning for gold, digging for gold. You're prospecting, right? Well, you are digging for gold. You're digging through all this research to try to find out who will fund you. So look at their geographic focus. I had a lady call me. She literally called me from a board that I applied to for some of our youth camps overseas. And she just was teary and said, what you do is so important and so needed. And my heart is so overwhelmed with, your proposal. She said, but we're not legally allowed to give money to projects that are done outside of the United States. She said, so my hands are tied. But she said, I will see if there's anybody else that I know of that I can refer you on to. So she's still a good contact to have. She's still somebody who's advocating for us. So it wasn't in vain, but it was outside of their geographic focus. Most of these private family or foundations or trusts, they're pretty flexible with how they allow you to use the funds. They're flexible too with if there's a big monkey wrench that's been thrown into your plan, like COVID. You weren't able to do what you said you were going to do because you weren't able to meet. They're the most flexible to work with. The government, no. But these private foundations are just people. So I'm going to give you an example, because this is going to be your bread and butter if you can really develop this. These private family foundations will be a good source of yearly income for your organization. All right, there's a guy I know, or I know of him, very committed Christian, was a youth that was from a really rough family, lost his parents at a young age, and just got involved with crime and all this stuff, and basically was a high school dropout. Someone took him under his wing, helped him, find his relationship with the Lord, helped him get back into school, and then helped him go through college. Well, this man went on to become a very, very successful businessman. And he, at the end of it, never had any kids. At the end of his life, thought, there's not that many people in my family that have any hardship. I really care about kids who went through what I went through, and I want to help them. So, he was very sympathetic to faith-based organizations, and he was really sympathetic towards youth that were in crisis or high-risk youth. And he was really interested in helping them with education. He felt like education was the key to getting out of crime and poverty and really what he'd been going through. So he set up a family foundation, and his nieces and nephews are the ones today that manage that foundation. They're the ones that read the grant, them and some other community leaders. So their premier focus is upon at-risk youth. These are just people. They're people who have money to give out and they care. So was Uncle Joe, you know, he wanted his money to go towards these very important causes when he was alive in his elderly years and then after he was dead. And so it's still going on to be a perpetual source for all sorts of wonderful faith-based causes. So I was able to talk them into giving to our organization, though we weren't education, but we did hit that at-risk youth with what we were asked to fund. So most of this money that they give, if Uncle Joe gave $50 million into his foundation, they're not granting that $50 million. That $50 million is going into an investment in what we call an endowment. They're granting the profit from the endowment. So that $50 million may give them $1.5 million a year of endowed funds. They're not going to touch the principal. That way they can continue to be a blessing for 100 years or more, you know, as long as that money stays endowed. So when the economy is good, there's more money for grants. When the economy is bad, it's a bad time to be a grant writer. But there's still always funds out there. Don't let that be your deterrent. I'm going to go online here to the foundationcenter.org. And if I were to look this up, I would go Foundation Center Online, and it'll take me to the login. Well, I'm already logged in, but this is what it would look like.
We can't see your screen, Jenny.
You can't see my screen?
We can't see your search that you're doing. We see your grant proposal notes.
Okay, so.
Just switch the view.
All right, stop. I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to go and switch to the thing I want to show you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate that. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
All right. You see up here, it says Foundation Directory Online. And it says find funding. They have, okay, I'm gonna scoot my little thing here. I know you can't see it, but it's in my way. It's showing me all my stuff for my Zoom. All right, so you can go here and you don't have to have a subscription to do just basic foundation research. So you can go not logged in and you can find who in your area is a private foundation. Some of them have websites that you can go to and look at. However, and you can also just search private foundations in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I know that's where the Varners are from. Or private foundations in, you know, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or private foundations that fund the Philippines, or wherever you want to do your work. You can search that in a Google search. Some things are going to come up, but that is a long way around a very big mountain. So use a program like this if you can. There are others that are less expensive that are more like $100 a year. The one I have, I pay for out of my ministry funds because I need it for ministry. I need it to be able to write grants for the organization I'm a part of. And so I use this out of funds that I raise. And this is about $150 a month if you do an annual subscription. So it's not cheap. But if you need some help with this and we set up a time, I will actually log in and run some research for you so that you've got some good prospects. All right, so this is the Foundation Center Online. This is the paid subscription. The other one is only going to give you basic information. It'll tell you who's in who's in that area, and if they have a website and their address and phone number, but they're not going to give you any of this detailed stuff. So we like the detailed stuff. Information is power, especially in grants, because the more you know, the more you're able to get a good return on your work investment. So I'm going to search here, and I'm going to search for, in fact, somebody just unmute your mic. Let's try someone in the USA first, and tell me where you're at, and just a synopsis of your cause that you're looking to write.
Clarksville Family Therapy, Individual Therapy for at-risk youth or domestic violence or addiction.
Okay, Clarksville. Is that Tennessee or Kentucky? I can never remember. This Tennessee.
Tennessee, right.
I should know because you're practically neighbors. And so what kind of family therapy?
Right. Well, let's do addiction. Let's do therapy and addiction.
Addiction, but that also would include at-risk youth.
Yeah, and veterans.
Youth.
That's where I'm trying to focus on.
Yeah.
At-risk youth and veterans.
Hey,
so,
we should collaborate.
yes, we should.
Just broke my pen. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to, I can just do a general search for addiction. Let's do mental and behavioral health in Clarksville, Tennessee. And let's see what it takes us to. All right, it's giving us saying there's no grant makers, no grants, no recipients. Here's several organizations that they suggest you check out. Well, that doesn't look very, I think because it's too broad. Let's go in here this way and do advanced search. All right, so instead of, they may not have these actual words posted. What it's doing is it's searching for those words that they can pull out. So if they don't have it, we'll just say, let's just look in Clarksville at what's there. And I'm going to uncheck the box that says includes federal funders, because we're not going to look for that. We're going to look for private family foundations. Clarksville, let's see what you got for us. And we're going to do a search. I'm going to show you how we can even, there are 213 grant makers, foundations of different kinds, that fund Clarksville or are in Clarksville. Isn't that amazing? There's 996 grants that we can look up. Some of those grants were from foundations that are in Clarksville. Some are grants that are from other states or other cities that have funded a program in Clarksville. 97 different nonprofits have received these grants, and there's 147 tax forms that we could go through. Do I ever go through the tax forms? Maybe twice in the last 12 years. No, it's tedious. You have to comb through those tax forms and look for things, and there's no reason to spend a lot of time. So what I would go through here is I would say, look, I want to reach out to those who are giving the most first. So I can click on total giving, and it's going to say the most money that goes out to the least money. Some of these foundations literally, you know, their assets are tied up in other programs and they have not been granting money. Could be because they've got other projects that they just give to every year, so they're not going to grant to anybody new. Well, the Gates Foundation, are they going to fund you? Maybe, maybe not. But if you wanted to look them up, they funded, this is how much they have in assets, this is how much they give, and this is how much they have funded in Clarksville. So you could go and click on this and actually look at who they gave to. Fidelity is a bank, so we don't want to go to them because they are not likely to fund a faith-based organization. Silicon Valley, probably the same thing. National Christian Charitable Foundation. I would say that's probably a lot better a possibility. So I'm going to click on this one. And what you all see the my screen here, which shows their data, National Christian Charitable Foundation. What I'm going to look for first is they're out of Alpharetta, Georgia, but they have given in that area of Tennessee. Now, it's very good that they have a website. Probably half, and I dare say half because it's gotten more and more over the last 5 years, of the foundations have a website that you will apply through a grant portal. You'll actually go to their site and upload your proposal that way. And that has everything that you need to know on there. But this is going to give you some historic information. Now, what's interesting here is it says the biggest area they fund is, it says their Christian foundation, they give to religion. Next is arts and culture, human services. So Raymond, your project falls into 2 of the top 3. It falls into religion, it falls into human services. And so you would be able to apply to them and be able to talk about the faith-based aspect, where if you were applying to somebody who gives to at-risk youth and addiction and family therapy and things like that, but they don't want to give to religious organizations, you would be able to just let them know that it's a faith-based ministry, but this is the work you do. They may say, well, you know, we won't discriminate against them because they're Christians, but, you know, they don't want to major on that. So you wouldn't really talk about that much in your grant proposal. All right, so let's go down and see who they've given to. Hope Pregnancy Center, several universities. Wow, yet again, universities and crisis pregnancy centers are the majority of who they've given to. But that shouldn't dissuade you, because even though you wouldn't fall into the same category with the university, you are doing human services. And so that would fall into the same category, you know, at-risk youth with crisis pregnancy centers. So you can see their grant amounts have been $2,800, but then this one for $15,000. It tells you what it was. This one was for prenatal care. This one was maternal and prenatal health. So you can go, and we won't spend the time today, but you could click on that and you could actually read a little synopsis of what they received the funds for. So what that does is it gives you a good idea. This is a really good, this is a good lead for you. So let's go back here. Now, there's several things you can do. One of the things I like to do is I would look at the amounts they give. That was between $1,000 and $15,000. So you remember, you never really want to ask for more than about 25% of your project. But with your project, we'll go over that here just shortly. We'll take a little break about 10:30 my time. Yeah. We'll just take a short break so everybody can get a cup of coffee and use the loo, and then we'll come back. But you know that between $1,000 and $15,000, depending on the size of your project and what all is in there, you would be able to go to them. So let's go down and see. Beyond that, they give basic emergency aid, Christianity, diseases and conditions. Hey, alcoholism and addiction does fall under disease. Education, if there's an educational aspect of what you're teaching, if they go through a specific course, you might be able to hit on that education as well. Family services, human services, mental health, religion. So this, Raymond, is just an excellent lead for what you would want to apply to. Purposes and activities. The foundation assists religious and charitable organizations in order to further the Christian community at large. Their background, they may or may not have anything populated. They just established in 1982. Some of the background gives you all the information about the founder, and that's the foundation I was telling you about with finding a foster and adoptive family recruitment person. I was able to use that information about their background to get them to fund a program they probably wouldn't have considered otherwise. Program areas, they give scholarships for students. So we can see that they give grants to individuals, they give college scholarships. That's just one program area. We do know that they give to other organizations. Now, do they have any RFPs? An RFP is a term you're going to hear frequently from medium to large size foundations. It's called request for proposal. You can apply for a grant and you can use your own proposal format if they don't put out an RFP, and you just follow their guidelines. The guidelines are going to tell you what all they want to put in, they want you to put in there. That's very helpful because you don't want to put together a 12-page booklet on your program if they only want a 1-page summary in that proposal. You need to really cater your proposal to exactly what they say in their guidelines. But if they put out an RFP, it will have a designated date by which you need to have it submitted. It'll have all the details on how to submit it, whether they want you to mail it in, they might want 1 copy. I had one foundation that had 14 board members and they wanted 14 copies of a 20-page proposal. So that literally was mailing them a, look like the old school Sears catalog. And I was mailing, it's a good thing it's not an environmental grant because it would be really a conflict of interest there. Some of them will tell you how to go onto their grant portal or will give you a specific code to get into that grant portal. But that RFP is going to be basically an information booklet on, it'll be 1 or 2 pages telling you exactly how to apply for that grant. RFPs are our friend, but you need to go through them. I print 2 copies. And I print it out because I like to be able to make notes. And I will go through and read it first 3 times. I will highlight everything that is really essential to remember. And then I'll start making notes in the margins. And that's my working copy. Then I'll go to the clean copy as I'm working through the writing of the proposal. And that will help me if I get really messy to go look it up or to make any new notes as we progress in the application. Because sometimes these grant portals get overwhelmed with requests, especially government sites. They're the worst and they go down. Are they going to give you any grace because their grant portal went down? No, I have never seen a foundation extend a deadline because they had a technical issue on their end. So just give yourself all the time in the world to get it done. Do not wait till the last minute. Now, this one says that they give on a national basis, and it's going to tell you the who's who's. Now, why is this important? They're telling you who runs the foundation. I will call and ask, do you require a copy of our 501c3, which is our nonprofit determination from the IRS? Do you require a copy of that or not? If they didn't say it in the RFP, or if they don't say it on their website, they'll say, yeah, we'll just go ahead and put it in there. Okay. Then I wait. I don't just say, okay, thank you, bye. I wait. And inadvertently they'll say, so what organization are you calling from? Oh, thank you for asking. And I'll begin to tell them all about the organization and about our project. And when they're sitting in a boardroom with 150 proposals, and I'm the only one who struck a conversation up with a board member, who are they going to remember when they're reviewing those? Who's going to go to the top of the list? Is it an unfair advantage? Oh yeah, but we need all the unfair advantages we can take. I just give them the empathy. So when they pick up my proposal, they're like, man, I remember that. I make people cry on the phone telling them stories about the people that we help. And it has just gone so many extra miles by just taking the time to pick up the phone and ask a question. And just allow the conversation to take place naturally. I can't tell you how many grants that we've won based on making a personal connection with somebody. All right, and it'll tell you how much staff they have. And then down below, if there's anything in the news about them, you can look up these articles. If they have a Facebook page, and these folks do, you can look up their Facebook page. All right, and here's the basic information. Here's their employer ID, identification number, their location in Alpharetta, Georgia, their contact information, so that telephone number is something you could call, and the email. And I don't always have time for the phone call, but I do like to email and say, we're getting ready to apply to your organization for this such and such project, and then maybe just ask a question to get a response so that you've got some communication going back and forth. That's what we call development. You want to develop the relationship with these charities so that your proposal stands out from everybody else's. There's a lot of need out there, and post-COVID, as we're hopefully going into a post-COVID era, the needs are going to be astronomical. So you're going to need to stand out in some way. And so that's a way to do it, is to write an email, make a phone call. All right. So let's go back here. We'll if we have time later, we'll go back and I'll do some different research for some folks, but I want to stop share. And instead I am going to researching foundations. First of all, no two foundations are alike. There's this wild and crazy idea that people have that they're going to write. In fact, people who have doctorates have come to me and said, if you could just write me a proposal, I'll just make photocopies of it and send it out. Oh man, that does not work. They will all get denied. That's a really bad idea, because no two foundations are alike, and they have different things that they want in there. They're going to know if you've just copied and pasted something and it's not specific to them, and they're just going to be, it's kind of offensive really, because you're asking them for thousands of dollars, some cases hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for big organizations, and you didn't even take the time to go through their guidelines. So instead, we want to see that that they're not alike. They have different things that they want in there. If you can give a nod to their history, or a nod to, I like to start off with a cover letter that says something like, we have been such admirers of your organization and the wonderful work you've been doing with X, Y, and Z. What does that tell them? That tells them, I know who you are and I respect you. So it starts off, that cover letter sometimes is required, sometimes it's not. That cover letter just introduces you. It's a handshake. So it just introduces you and your project, and it's a letter that's going to go before your proposal. Most of them don't require it, some do. I like to put it in anyway. It's just a politeness. And I like to give a nod to maybe their history or their longevity in the 77 years that your organization has been founding, or that your organization has been funding projects in our community. What does that tell them? I've looked you up. I'm not just sending you a blanket proposal. So make sure that you do your research and that you write this really nice, professional, but endearing cover letter. And let them know in that cover letter, keep it brief, no more than a page. If you can make a half page or 3/4 page, all the better. They're tired of reading at this point. These are people who are volunteers, most of them, who are reading your proposals. They're Uncle Joe's nieces and nephews. They don't want to have to read more than they have to. So if you can put just a short synopsis of your project. Large foundations meet frequently. I would say those that have they grant over $500,000 or more. They meet usually monthly, sometimes twice a month. And if they have a rolling deadline, if they say they accept applications at all time, here's a very good trick for you. If half of the research you do is going to say they accept applications at any time. So when is the best time to apply? that might be where you call and ask your dumb question. You call them and say, I see you accept applications at any time. Are there, here's our project. Is there a specific time of the year that is the best time to apply? What I have found out is that some endowments have a payout in the spring. So they accept applications all year long, but if you apply in January and that payout is not coming till April 1st, you're probably not going to get funded. You'll get whatever's left from last year, whatever didn't get granted. You're at the bottom of the barrel. So it might be good for you to find out. They might let something slip. Like, well, our big grant season is the spring. They might not tell you the exact time, but they'll say the spring. So you'll know April, May, March, April, May timeframe is when you should ask. However, it's better for you to wait if they accept applications throughout the year, a few more months, and send a really excellent proposal as opposed to rushing and sending a proposal that's a little sloppy, or you may or may have missed something. You might have more in there than you need, and it's just wordy and labor intensive for them to get through it. They're more likely to have a bad opinion if you just made them struggle through your bad writing or typos or anything like that. So it's better to take time and have a proposal that you can go back a year from now and read and say, I wouldn't change a word. That was awesome. There's several proposals that I've written that I go back, and sometimes I just read it because it's good writing. And I'm like, if nobody sheds a tear reading this, then they've got hearts of stone. Especially if it's a program for at-risk youth and you're talking about, the impact and but go ahead and research as much as you can and really pay attention to those deadlines. And then you're going to start a calendar based on those deadlines. So get an Excel spreadsheet out and put April 1st, the Carter Charitable Foundation, May 15th, the such and such foundation, so that you can stay ahead of it and you can be working on the proposal first that you need for that organization. So make sure that you get an Excel spreadsheet going with a grant calendar there. Be very courteous in all of your interactions. These are people, if you're rude to them, sometimes they will just not even consider. They have the right to do that. They have the right to say, hey, that guy was a jerk on the phone. Let's not even read this. Here's the differences between them. Most of them have guidelines for their applications, but not everyone does. Some of them just want you to put together your own proposal. I don't like that because I want to know what they expect. I don't know if they want 10 pages or 1 page. Most proposals are going to run 3 to 5 pages. I think that's usually standard for a private foundation. Some fund large projects and others prefer to fund many smaller programs. Now, those of you on the call, and there's plenty of you who are involved with international missions, you know that this works the same with a lot of the churches that support your work overseas. Some of them will say, hey, we'll fund 4 missionaries at a significant amount. And then there's other churches that say, we'll support 80 missionaries at a much smaller amount. The same is true for private foundations. One's not better than the other. You have a better odds with the ones that fund a lot with small amounts than those who fund just a few with larger amounts, but both are worth going for. Some say they'll only give to educational and only grant scholarships. And for the seminary there, the Asian seminary, you have a good opportunity because you are higher education. And so there's a lot of foundations that will only give to education. And I think that you've got an excellent shot. And I would welcome those on the call. I think we've got about 4 from the seminary that, let's set up another Zoom time. And this is with free of charge, where we will spend about an hour and we'll go through some prospects for you, because what you do is very unique. And I think it's very fundable as well. All right. So some only give to education. Now, you might be able to, if you fit in there, and I'm going to use our brother up in Clarksville for I'm sorry I called you Raymond. I got you confused with someone else. But our brother from Clarksville, Chaplain, I'll just call you Chaplain K because I don't know how to pronounce your name well.
Chaplain
But
Dan.
yeah, Dan, I'll call you Dan. There you go. Your project up there in Clarksville, you know, could fall in the education category. So don't write off a foundation that gives to higher education, because you might be able to convince them, since your program will have an element of educating people or a specific curriculum maybe that you're using, that you could hit on that. So, all right. Some have a lot of information out there that you can research, and others, they're obscure. You really will find very little about them. The foundations that fund the most money put out the most information. But I really actually have gotten money from foundations that they don't want people to know they're there. They don't want to have to come through 150 proposals. They want 2 or 3. So they really want the people who have done the research and have found them to be the only applicants. They're harder to find, but you're more likely to get funded regularly from them. Some have a very quick turnaround time, a week. They'll let you know within a week. I've had some within a day or 2, and others, it's been up to a year. You might get an award letter and not get the check. It's very rare that the check comes first. It did with the Walmart Foundation, but it's very rare. I'm going to give you an example. There's a university that we get funded through. It's a Christian university. They get money from the Lilly Endowment every year, and we've received 2 grants. Hopefully we'll receive a 3rd this year. I'll find out next month. And we receive grants to do ministry through their university, not affiliated with anyone here, I'm pretty sure. And what that is that they will re-grant out for specific projects. So they get a worship grant from Lilly Endowment. I think Lee University's gotten the same grant, but they re-grant out to other organizations who are doing worship projects. So our project has been helping veterans who have traumatic experiences, to help them integrate back into the church when they come back from deployment. So that was our project that we received funding from them. They sent us an award letter and a plethora of paperwork to go through before we got the check. And then we only got the check like 3 months later after we'd started the project. So we had to have a little bit of we had to have some startup capital to go ahead and do our project before we got their check. And with them, we get the check about 2 months into a 1-year project. And then at the 6-month mark, we send them an interim report on how we're doing. It's a 1-page report. They send us a format, we fill it out, we send it back. Then they release the second check around Christmas time, and then we're able to do the last half of the grant. But you need to be prepared for that. It's really awkward when you don't have the money. Let me admit someone here. You don't have the money to start the project because they haven't sent you the check, but the clock is ticking. You said we would start June 1st, and it's June 28th, and you haven't received your check, but you said you'd have such and such done in the month of June. You need to go ahead and do it. That's why it's difficult for all of your eggs to be in one basket. You need a lot of funding sources. So if somebody's late sending you a check, you don't have to make the awkward call like, hey, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Where's the money? We need that check. But it happens with donors too, doesn't it? Where you'll have a donor saying they're going to give a check, and you're, 30, 60 days later, you're like, where's the check? It's so awkward to have to call and ask and be polite about it because you don't want to be rude, but it does happen. All right, so many fund from different areas in your state, region, nationally, or internationally, while others fund only in very specific geographic areas. Now, for those who are connecting from overseas, and I think we have at least 5 to 10 on the call today, let me give you a good tip. The McClellan Foundation, McClellan, I believe. out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. They fund a variety of, and Jenny Varner's on our call, she's from Chattanooga. They fund a lot in Chattanooga. They have a lot of money that goes local, and they do a lot of good work in a variety of work from a variety of different McClellan foundations in that Chattanooga area and in that county. But the main foundation is really only interested in international missions. Now, they are one of the biggest and most wealthy, I hate to use that word, but it's true, Christian foundations in the United States. They don't hold a candle to the Lilly Endowment, but Lilly Endowment is difficult to get money from. McClellan, you can go on their website. Make sure before you do that you have a short paragraph that is so excellently written about who you are, what your project's about, because as you go through their website, they're going to ask you questions, and they're not going to tell you what the next question is. So have everything down on a Word document that you can copy and paste and edit very quickly and slip it in there, because they're going to ask who you are and what your project is, and you only have a certain amount of characters that you can fill in that blank with before you click next, and it'll come up the next question. So you can't start and stop, you have to go through the whole thing. The unfortunate thing for us is that they're not really interested in what we're doing with the military. They're really looking for more traditional missionary work. And so if that applies to you, they're a really good lead for you for international missions, or those of you who are working in that area of Tennessee. All right, so their geographic area is just overseas right now. There are foundations that will consider proposals from any 501c3 nonprofit agency. If you are a church, you fall under the 501c3 determination of your denomination. If you are a church in good standing, you're reporting, and all of that is on the up and up, you can use that 501c3 nonprofit. You don't have to go get your own. If you are working as a ministry of your local church, you will need to check with if you're not the pastor, before you write a grant that includes or is a part of that local church, you need to get something in writing from the church board and from definitely the pastoral leadership, saying that you're working together for that. If you don't have a 501c3 and you are not writing it as part of a denomination or part of a local church, you need to get a 501c3 determination before you go onward. And that takes setting yourself up as an organization. Just Google how to do that and get some resources, because there's no sense applying for grants that you don't qualify for if you don't have that 501c3 nonprofit letter. Now, when you do, if you're part of, I'm going to use the example of the Church of God, because we have a lot of Church of God ministers here. If you are part of the Church of God, you can use their nonprofit determination letter, and the offices there in Cleveland should be able to give you a copy of that to submit with your grant if you don't have a copy. But most churches already have a copy of that IRS determination letter. But I hope what you can see up here is it says on this PC, which is my desktop, which I have to tell you, I'm really bad about filing stuff on my desktop, the files I use mostly. FOI is Freedom Outreach International and Jacob's Generation Grants. This is the ministries that I'm part of. And this is my grant research for that. As you can see, there's a lot of it. And so every foundation that I research, even if they end up being a dead end, that research is going to go in here. Why would I keep research that I realized after I downloaded some information that it's not going to work out? Well, that reason that I can put a big red sign at the top of that research saying this is a dead end, because otherwise I might forget and go and research them and do all this stuff again. I'm going to go back to Foundation Center and I'm going to show you how to download some of the research and put them in your files. But here's the different foundations that I have gone through. And then I want to show you here, I'm going to stop share so that I can open up and share a different thing with you real quick. A grant calendar. All right, let's show the grant calendar. This is my 2020 grant calendar, which I did not win any grants because of COVID. Thank you, COVID. We have some grants that are still pending, but it was difficult because, as you know, about last February, March, really about last year this time, a lot of foundations quit accepting proposals because of the uncertainty and everything that was going on, and they turned their funds to managing the crisis of COVID-19. So we do still have to navigate those waters. So if there's any way that you can put something about COVID into your grant, any way that it fits, any way that makes your project more compelling or more important or more timely, go ahead and put that in there. But this is mine from last year. And what I was able to do, as you can see, it is a 28 pages of research. It's a 28-page calendar. Because I put everything I researched in here. If it ended up being a dead end, I put a big red slash through it. So I won't remove it. I need to make sure I knew that First Horizon Foundation was not going to fund an organization like ours. But I went ahead and put a big slash through it. The ones that I had sent grants to, and they immediately were like, we're not accepting applications at this time. I went ahead and I shaded those, threw some shade on those with just putting a highlight of gray. And then I marked the ones, this is an old copy. This was a copy from, I think, about April or May of last year. Of the ones that are marked green and yellow are the ones that I thought were the best prospects to go ahead and get on as quickly as possible. Some of these say, like if you look at item 13 for the MJ Murdoch Charitable Trust, it says grant, I needed to send it by January 15, 2020. Well, I didn't find them in time to send that proposal. And this year, their deadline is going to change based on what's happening with COVID-19. But an LOI is called a letter of inquiry. And I want to walk you through quickly what that is after I show you the rest of this grant calendar real quick. This is what the calendar looks like. You put the dates on first. If it's something that it's just saying ASAP, it's a great prospect for you. So let's go ahead and do them first. Or we'll put their dates. And so it'll go down where the ones in February, March, April, May, it'll go all the way. So the end of my 28 pages are the ones that are due at the end of the year. Which are, most of them will be around springtime, and then there's another grant surge in the fall where there's a lot of dates given to us in the fall. But this is what it looks like, and as you can see, I've just put this together I put it in Excel, and I copied it over to a Word document only because my preference is, I think it's easier for me to read in a Word document than it is to read in Excel. I'm just old school that way. First of all, I have the numbers here, so I can always refer back to its number 13 on my list. But it'll say the target or the due date. If I don't have a due date, if it doesn't tell me when they're accepting applications, I'll put the due date there. And then I'll also go back and list when I sent it. So after I send it, I would go ahead and write down when I sent it. It's going to tell you the foundation name, the program that it matches. And for this one, it was technical needs of the organization, software needs and things like that, and cameras, and the ask range. And so I put that in there that they will go up to $120,000. Now, is that how much I'm going to ask? No, I'm going to ask based on our project. If we have a technical grant that we only need $50,000 to make some videos in-house, I'm not going to even ask them for all $50,000. I would probably ask them for 10 to 15. Because like I said, the rule of thumb is you don't really want to ask for more than 25% of your grant unless you have a good relationship with them and you're certain that they would fund you at a higher level. All right, so that's what that looks like. That's what all those numbers are. There's different programs within your organization. If you are like the seminary, you might have a program that's just scholarships for students. You might have a program to improve your housing. If you have housing on your campus that you feel is inadequate or you need to build more housing, those would be different programs. If it's something about hiring a new professor in a certain area that's needed, that might be a new program. Whatever, if it's, you know, benevolence, outreach to the area, whatever it is, you can have multiple programs within your organization. You're not going to just ask them to give you a check for, just give us a check because we'll know what to do with it. No, you're going to tell them exactly what you're going to do with it and why you're asking them for that specific program. So I have worked with probably 24 different 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and they all tell me at one time or another, well, we just need money, you know, we just need money that comes in, not for a specific purpose, but just for overhead and all that. Well, here's one of the problems you have with that, and I'm going to put on my note here to go through what a budget looks like with you. They're not going to give you money for just general operating expenses. Even if it says they do give money for general operating expenses, they're going to give that to you as part of a program. So everything in your organization needs to come down to, we have a program for this, we have a program for this. Like Dan up in Clarksville, you know, one might be the addiction recovery, one might be family therapy, one might be at-risk youth. You know, segment it out so that you can really specialize, and somebody who would not give you money for family therapy might give you money for veterans ministry. So make sure that you're compartmentalizing everything and you can have a broad scope of your organization, but also all the different little elements that make up what you do. All right, and then you're asked to arrange your notes in the response. When you get a response, write it down. If you don't get a response, as we didn't, write that down too. And so that's what the grant calendar looks like. I'm going to stop sharing that, and I am going to show you an actual grant, because I know you all want to, if you haven't written a grant before, or if it's been a long time, you want to know what it looks like. So I'm going to open this one up. I'm going to show you grant proposal. All right, I have two things quickly to show you. The first one's going to be a sample letter of inquiry. What is a letter of inquiry? Sometimes they don't want an entire proposal. Like I mentioned, these are volunteers. They get tired of reading all this stuff. They want you to send them a letter of inquiry, and they will let you know whether you have permission to apply or an invitation to apply. An LOI, sometimes you'll see that as a letter of intent, and sometimes you'll see it written as letter of inquiry. It's the same exact thing. Different organizations use the I as intent or inquiry, but it's, or letter of interest. I've seen it actually like that as well. But the LOI is basically, this is a short synopsis, usually 1 page, and it can go up to 2 pages. It's really up to you. And it gives them an idea of who you are and what your project is and how much money you'll be asking them for. And if they're interested, they'll get back to you and say, hey, go ahead and apply. We're going to meet at such and such date. We'll need your proposal by this date. All right, so this person, and I'm using it, this is from the Foundation Center online, from some of their samples. They're from a prep school, and they're applying to this foundation. What they did is they put the name of the president of that foundation, whoever is the executive director or the president, and you'll put their name on there instead of just the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. You want that on there, but you don't want it just to be so generic. You want to say, Dear Deborah. You want to make it personal. And then you'll go through, first of all, why they should care about your project and what the project is. And then you'll go into a little bit more of the detail of your project. And then you'll go to your, what we call a case for support. A case for support is if they've got proposals from 20 different similar organizations, what makes yours stand out? It's like, we have the most experienced people doing such and such, or we've been serving this community for the longest, or we have partnerships with 3 other organizations. Those are the sort of things that are going to make you stand out. Or we're located, if you're doing benevolence, in the area of the city with such and such demographic need. You can prove that you've got a little bit more of a case than another organization. It's very, very competitive, so you need to stand out. And then they go through with the amount they're asking for. They said $100,000 of operating support for our school. So in the packet, I'm going to send you all, it will have, in fact, I think I can link it to the recording so that you can download it from here. But if not, I'll send it to as many emails as I have. So if you didn't send me an email, again, or if you don't get it, my email is jacobsgen@gmail.com. Jacobs, Gen, like generation, @gmail.com. And if you don't receive it, let me know and I will send it to you. But it'll be a clean copy of just the very basic things, one that has a sample letter of inquiry in it. So if you're asked to send that, you'll have a format. All right, we're going to go through an actual proposal now. Now, we spent some time talking about your cover letter, which will go on top of your proposal, but we didn't talk much about the proposal itself yet. So let's go ahead and get into that. What does a proposal look like? Well, the first thing, they should see a table of contents so that they know, going back, what is going to be inside this proposal. This is really only important if your proposal is over about 3 pages long. But go ahead and do the table of contents. And then after that, you will do an introduction. This is where you tell a little bit about the history of your organization and just a snapshot view of the project itself, like an executive summary would be. The next part of your proposal is the problem or your needs statement. This is also what we call your case for support. And this is the most important part of your proposal because it's going to answer questions that form the base of your entire project. What are the needs that your program is meeting for the community? And it needs to be concise and have the most up-to-date stats that you can get for your area. So if you're doing a project that combats, we'll say, domestic violence, get the most recent domestic violence statistics for your area and not just national statistics. But you'll go ahead and make your case for support, why you're the best poised to fill that need in the community. Now, just after your needs statement are your goals and objectives. And a lot of people get confused between what are goals and what are objectives. So let's just go through that. Your goals are your long-term goals that demonstrate your impact. And you want to state these, at least 2 of them, 2 to 3 things that your project is going to do. At the end of your 1-year project period, or however long it is, this is what the result will be. And then your objectives are really the stepping stones that get you to your goal. You can say, that in the case of a domestic violence grant, that you will help 150 women escape domestic violence and etc. So how are you going to do that? Your objectives are, first, you're going to network in the community with other organizations that serve women in that area. The second thing you're going to do is this other. So your objectives are the stepping stones that get you to your goal. Those will need to be perfected. You don't want to send out goals and objectives that are not measurable, are not obtainable. So you want your goals to be significant, but not so lofty that you're going to feel like you can't reach those goals. It needs to be attainable within your project. The next part is your method or activities. This is also called your program model. And this is just taking your goals and objectives and expanding it out in a narrative form, saying this is how we're going to accomplish it, and put it chronologically so they can see it unfold as they read it. Who's going to do the work? And if you have people who are specifically qualified to do this work, list them in there. You can put in the addendum in the back. You can put their resumes if you feel like that it's needed there. And then when is it going to be done? So I like to include here not just your program model, but also a timeline. So you want to show them that you have it planned out, who's going to do the work, and when they're going to do it. And by such and such a date, X, Y, and Z are going to be done. So you want this program model to include a timeline. The next section will be your evaluation. Everything you say you're going to do should have a measurement tool that you're going to tell them how you're going to evaluate what you're doing. It's great to have wonderful goals, but how will you know at the end of your project that you have achieved those goals or that you're achieving it along the way? You need a measurement tool, and go ahead and tell them what that measurement tool is going to be. And in some cases, projects can be a little bit abstract, and it might be surveys that you do if you're doing a program like a parenting class. Surveys you do at the beginning of your class and surveys at the end to show how their attitude towards parenting has changed, how their actions with their kids have changed, those sorts of things. But the more scientific you can get with your evaluation tools, the better. So if you're in a social science field where you're doing a project, go ahead and look at what other measurement tools are being used in that field and see if you can implement it. Even if you're writing a big grant, have an outside evaluator come and write that cost into your budget, to have somebody from the outside come along the way and let you know how you're doing, as well as at the end to give you a final report. And then at the end of your grant is your budget and your budget justification. We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on in the training, and I'm going to actually show you my organization or my budget for my department at least, so that you can see what that looks like. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the details. So your budget is, of course, your numeric values for everything. Your budget justification will be a narrative explanation of how you got to those numbers. How did you come up with that number for your mileage? How did you factor in, your per diem? What rate are you using for those? So that's where your budget justification will be. It sounds more complicated than it is, which is why I suggested you get a book like Grant Writing for Dummies. I think that's a great resource, and it has lots of not only examples in there, but also software. If you're putting together a budget for the first time, that will help you do that. And I'll show you a little bit of what the proposal looks like. Now, I didn't show you the cover letter, so I'm sorry I skipped that, but the cover letter is a lot like your letter of inquiry. It's just shorter, and it has more of an executive summary in it, more of a brief, concise synopsis of what you're going to be doing. I prefer to put it in there. That's just my preference. The first thing I'm going to do is give them the organizational history and the background of our project. I'm going to let them know, first of all, that we're not fly by night. We've been doing this for a while. If you're a startup, you're going to have to really sell to them why they should fund you if you're just starting your organization, or you're just starting this project. You're going to have to say, for Chaplain Dan, you could say, because of my history as a chaplain in the military and my 20-something years of service or whatever, that you can use as a launching point. They need to see your credibility. And this is the organizational history, and your background is going to give them the credibility. For over 60 years, this movement's been blah, blah, blah. And then a little bit about what it looks like. And for me, I have to paint a picture of what our military ministry looks like overseas, because it is so unusual and so outside the box that most people don't. Most civilians in the States have no idea what in the world that is. Sometimes I use the phrase, we're like a Christian USO. The reason I put that in there in quotes is I don't want to get in trouble with the USO, but also I want them to get a picture in their mind of its part church, part outreach center where people can come together. And that really helps them to get a grip on, a snapshot of what the ministry looks like. Now I'm going to talk about not the organization, not the history. I'm going to talk about this project. We have 200,000 children and youth that are living overseas because their parents are in the military. That's the first thing I come off the diving board with, because that is the most compelling data that I have. Did you know there's 200,000 American military kids that don't live in the US? They have to live in another country because their parents are stationed there, and they are cut off from a lot of the services and a lot of the supports that they would otherwise have had in the United States, to include a lot of Christian ministry that they just don't get because they're abroad. And so I go into the most compelling data first, and then I talk about a little bit about deployment. Their parents are more likely to be deployed when they're overseas, and so they have additional stress when they're living abroad. I go into a little bit about a lack of programs in that area. And so we're seeking support for that. Then I tell them where we're going to do it, except that we had canceled by COVID, but we had a castle in Austria booked, and we have it booked this year as well, where we're going to do it, and then what exactly the support is going to go to. And so financial responsibility, I can tell them that my husband is a project director, and that he is the one that manages the budget, We go through all of this sort of thing. And then I was able to put the budget in there. And let me see if I've got a copy. I'm gonna stop share real quick and show you what a grant budget looks like. Okay, I'm going to show you my dream budget. I've never actually met my entire budget, but what it would look like so that you can know how to put together your budget if you don't have one, or if you have a broad budget for a big organization like the seminary, but you're doing a project and you're applying for a project, how to break that project budget down so that it fits in your overall organization. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to share my screen. All right, in the training, I actually shared our own budget for Jacob's Generation, and I didn't want to put that out there publicly. So if you just Google grant budget samples or examples, you'll be able to pull up a lot of different things that are online. And what I'm showing you actually is a grant that was made public. And so we're going to go through that a little bit because it shows you a bit about the different areas. So that's a very simple budget, but we're going to start at the top. And you see where they have program name. So you would want also your organizational name and then the program name. And then to say that it's the budget details, and then FY is your fiscal year, which of course is not always the same thing as your calendar year. So you want to make sure that you have your fiscal year. So this looks like it was done in Excel and that was pasted over to Word just to make it a little bit, or saved as a PDF out of Excel. But we're going to go through this and look at the different categories. Now, as you do some research and look at different books and different online resources, you'll see different templates that are out there. And I encourage you again to go on to Foundation Center and some more of these sites and just look at some sample grant budgets. But we're going to go through this one today, and you'll see where every category they put in a different color. Sometimes I shade these just a little bit of a darker gray. Because a lot of the grants, if they're printed up, I'll print them in black and white anyway. But that just shows the person reviewing your grant that this is a section. And so the first section we're going to look at is personnel. This is pretty common. Anybody who needs to receive wages out of this should be listed under personnel. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about why you should list those that oftentimes in the faith community we leave off people from this category. But we're going to go into who should be on there and the different columns to the right of it. So the first person you see here, they have the executive director listed. And I'm going to go through the columns on the right to explain what those are before we go into why you should list the different folks. FTE stands for full-time equivalency. And so they're expecting their executive director to spend 1/4 of his or her time on this project, as it's a project within the greater organization, as most projects are. So 1/4 would be 0.25. And then CDVSA is the grant program that was being applied for in this year, and it's a government program. So we can estimate that the executive director's annual salary is $44,000. We get that because we see that 1/4 out of the grant is $10,000, and then the organization is going to bring a cash match. Sometimes this is required, especially in government grants. In private foundation grants, it's not required. It's maybe good to show what your organization is putting towards the project if you can. And then the in-kind donation, and this is a term that's not familiar to everyone. In-kind is a term that means services in lieu of funds. And so if the executive director is going to just donate his or her time, then we could put a certain percentage in that category of, they could have put that as an in-kind contribution instead of a cash contribution. And so the project total for the executive director's salary is going to be 25% of their salary, $11,000. Then we see an administrative assistant, and they're not asking anything out of the grant for this administrative assistant. Now, this could be because the grant, they've maybe maxed out the percentage that they're allowed to ask for from the grant for personnel. But, you do need administrators. And so it's good, even if you have a church clerk or something, even if you don't pay, if that person's a volunteer, put it in as what they would be paid as a professional. Put that in the in-kind contribution. So if the average administrator makes $24,000 a year, but this person's volunteering their time, and they're going to spend 25% of what would be considered a full-time job, doing this 10 hours a week, then you could take that amount, $7,500 for the year, and put it in there as an in-kind contribution from that person. And so it shows strength for your project without you having to bring a cash contribution to the project for everything. Now the next few lines, and you see on the far left they're listing those as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. And that's because when you go to put it the next page, which would be your grant narrative, you would need to put a executive director's with salary and benefits, $44,000 a year. You would need to write that out in a narrative form, and you could list it also personnel A, and then you go in so that it's easy for them to match back and forth what line item you're on. But you see in C through H, we have other program people that are going to be involved and what percentage of their time. You see that the children's advocate on line E is one full-time position at $28,000 a year. And so you see that another program coordinator is only 50% of a full-time equivalency, so about 20 hours a week, and what that rate would be. And then you see over here that you have volunteer advocates on H. And of course, there's no charge to the grant because they're volunteers, but that would equal 40 hours a week at an in-kind contribution of $28,000 for the project. So listing out your in-kind contributions, the non-cash value added, is important to strengthen your grant. Remember that everything is very competitive. You're going against other organizations that have thought about these details. So don't neglect your in-kind contributions and showing that you've got a strong volunteer core as well as paid staff. The next category you'll see is travel. Now, for a ministry like ours, we have quite a heavy travel budget because we don't have one stationary location. We go where our students and their families are overseas. So as far as facility expenses are nearly nothing for us, but our travel is very high. So you'll see here that they have an A and B, and it says destination and purpose, and program participant travel, emergency and non-emergency, and then staff travel, which they have broken down into training and business. Now, and then of course at the end you always have the subtotal for that category. Now don't forget that you're going to have to write beyond your numeric budget. You're going to have a narrative budget justification. And then you'll be able to explain how you came up with those numbers. What does the $10,000 in emergency travel cover? Is it reimbursement for gas? If so, at what rate? Is it gas receipts, or are you paying mileage? And if so, where did you get that mileage percentage number? Most people will use whatever the federal rate or the state rate if you're in maybe a state that has a lower cost of living or a much higher cost of living. You'll want to use that rate instead. But that needs to be explained in your budget justification to keep your numeric budget very simple. Now we're going to go to facility expense. If you have a building in which you have a mortgage or you pay rent on, you can put your rent, lease, your communications, your phone bill, utilities, maintenance and repair. Those sorts of things will go under your facility expense. Now, if you do not have a stationary program, such as ours, our facility expense would be the facilities we have to rent out during the time that we're doing ministry overseas. And so I would list those facility expenses under my line item there in 300 facility expense. All right, so you see their next line is commodities. For us, and this is not a complete budget, it's just a sample that was found online, we would put our food and that sort of thing in there. And if it's a per diem, if you're counting like for staff travel, if you're counting a per diem, you need to show where you're drawing that per diem from. If it's, the federal rate for per diem, etc. And of course, that federal rate is different by zip code. And so you're going to have to look that up and then put that in your budget justification where you got that number. For us, we do, if we do a retreat or camps and we've got a food expense, we're going to explain what that expense is, the price per person for the event, and that would be our budget, and we'll put that in there. So that's another expense that we would have. So now we're going to shift into a different sample grant budget, and you'll see here that they put total direct expenses, and that's personnel plus the program expenses. And then they're listing other funding sources. And so they're putting what was received and what is pending for those. That just shows that you are being proactive and getting other funding. And then they have a grand total direct expense is $38,236. And then below that, you'll see that they say indirect expense, or also more commonly known as indirect costs. So your indirect costs, you're allowed, it's a general rule of thumb, 10% of the grant to go for indirect costs. And these are things that are going to come up that just for you to be able to do the project. And they understand that there's variables. That gives you a 10% cushion to be able to handle those variables. A lot of a lot of nonprofits do not take indirects. And the reason is they think it makes their budget look better. I've set in on trainings that were provided by charitable foundations, and they've told us that when they review a grant budget that does not have indirect costs listed, that they frown upon that, and they might score it lower. Believe it or not, grants get scores. They might score it lower because they feel like it's not realistic. You need to put that 10% in there. That can go, anything that's not spent can go into your general budget. Who doesn't need more, funds on their general budget? But if you do encounter an issue, you have that 10% cushion. So always put in your 10% for indirect costs. All right, that's what I have for you. We could go back to Foundation Center. I'm going to do that very, very briefly and show you how to download some of that information. And let me also state that if you do not have a subscription, I would say probably most of you don't, to Foundation Center Online because it's so costly. Most universities will let you use their library for free. You don't have to be a student to ask them to use their library. Community college, use their library for free. You can go in with a flash drive and do all your research and download these documents rapid fire. When I first resigned from doing this professionally for a season, I did not spend the money on Foundation Center Online. Because of being so portable now, I feel like if I don't have time to go into a library and do this. But I would go to a public library or a university with a flash drive. They allow you to do that. And I would just start rapidly downloading documents, and I would sift through it later at home. So I'd spend a good 2 or 3 hours just going through and doing the research. So let me make sure that I'm back up. Here we are. And I'm going back to Foundation Center. I'm going to show you how to download this. I'm going to. All right.
Did you say the cost annually was $150?
No, that's monthly. Yeah, $150 a month. If you do the annual subscription, that means that you can't cancel it. You have to keep paying each month. So it is expensive.
Is this the one we're looking at now, the one that you pay $150?
Yes, they have a site. This is the intraweb, or the intranet part of their web page, the paid part. You can go to the unpaid part and get all kinds of information and research there. In fact, I recommend that you go to just type into your Google search Candid, or I think it's candid.org. But you can also go Foundation Center, I think FC Online, Foundation Center Online, and you should be able to get to the free site. You're going to be very limited in what you can find because they want you to pay for it. But let me just show you a little bit of the interaction here. So I went to this one. I want to go to religion. I can go say, let's say we want to do, it'll tell me how much they give for religion, and everything on their site is interactive. So you can click it, and let's go to Christianity. we would go evangelical and not Catholic. So, and I'm going to keep clicking. They had 25 different grants that were for evangelical Christian causes in this time frame. And they're going to tell you where they are and who they are. And you see this here where I can export data. I can go here and I can export this chart, and I could just start a file, and it would give me either a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet with all this information on it. But I want to go back here to, let me back out of this. Oh, I backed all the way out. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, I'll just, I'll just pick someone so you can see. Let's go to HCA Foundation out of Nashville. They have a website. Let's go to that real quick. But I want to come back here and look at them. If I just want this general fact sheet about the HCA Foundation, I can go up here and click this and save it as a PDF. Then everything I'm looking at from top to bottom is going to show up. So I'm going to save the PDF on my desktop. Okay, do you all see that? That's what the PDF is going to look like. It's exactly like the web page, and it is awesome. This is what I go to the library and I start clicking, just download this, and go to the next foundation, download this. I just go to their basic page like this and click on the PDF download. If you forgot your thumb drive or you didn't have one or you prefer to do it this way, I can email this PDF to myself. I have done that and gone home and I have 57 different emails from myself from Foundation Center data that I can sift through when I have time. When you're sitting at the library working, you don't necessarily have time to flush it out. You just want to save the general information. So that's what you can do. Now, I want to go here to Tennessee and just take a gander real quick at Tennessee.
Well, I have a quick question.
Yes.
You're saying the universities, colleges, that we can go use their library. Are you saying they can access the cost part of
Yes.
So it's
They
free.
have subscriptions, as almost every public university and private university, and a lot of community colleges, they have subscriptions to Foundation Center that you can access through their library for free. So you don't have to pay for the subscription, but you get all this information.
Thank you.
Also, good to know, I recommend that you get a hold of the Foundation Center and you say, I'm interested in a subscription. Could I get a free trial to get familiar with it first? It's typical they'll give you a 24-hour code that will get you into the site for free. Back in the days before I was paying for it, I would just call and ask them, and they would give me a code, and in 24 hours, I would have like 150 files saved, and I would just spend all day long downloading. So you can do that too. They'll give you a free trial, but it's a very narrow window. I think once they gave me a 3-day, 12 years ago when I first started, they gave me a 3-day code, but I think right now it's only a 24-hour code. All right, so what I can do is I am in Williamson County. If I were doing a project in my own county, I can click on here and I can find out who they gave to in my county in Tennessee. And every single page has got the same little tab. I can export any of this. So I would start an HCA Foundation file and just start loading data in there. I would just start saving this sort of stuff. I don't know what platinum and silver is. That's probably a new feature that they put on there. But I would be able to go through, and if I wanted to say, hey, what is Grace Works Ministries? And I can see, hey, if they do similar work to what I'm doing, I can look at their grant amounts and the years that they received it. And I can say, okay, in 2018, and remember, they're going through old data. They're probably 2018 is going to be the most current for now. Sometime this year, they're going to upload 2019 data. But I can say they gave $15,000 to Grace Work Ministries in 2018. I'm going to find out what that is. And I'm going to go there, and it tells me operational funding for human services for low-income people groups. All right. So any of this, I can still go over here and go to save that PDF or email it to myself. So I wanted to show you guys that, to show you how much, if you're super nerdy like me, it's kind of fun to do the research, because it is like looking for a needle in a haystack, but when you find that needle, you're like, yes, because you do find really good prospects out there. And always remember, I mean, I don't ever have a problem selling to people what I do for a living. I believe in these kids. I believe in being an advocate for them. And that's what I've given my life to do. So I never have a problem holding my hand out for somebody else. I'll go speak to any group that asks me to come speak. I'll, you know, drive across the nation to attend a missions conference or whatever. So don't be shy in really getting people on board with what you do. I'm going to tell you a real quick story, and then we're going to open it up for questions here. We'll go, you know, we said we'd be done at 38 minutes after the hour, so we have 14 minutes left. But I'm going to keep it open for those who want to stay on and ask some more questions. Here's where the personal relationship is going to get you further. I had an opportunity to write a grant for a children's home, and it was for a girls-only children's home. So I wrote to a foundation, sent a proposal into it. It was a women-only foundation, and they supported a lot of causes that I didn't necessarily support. But that didn't keep me from going and asking them for money for these girls. So it's not unethical. If they support something that you don't support, well, you know, why should they give all of their money to something that you don't like? At least let them give some money to something that is a good cause. So I went to them and said, you're a female-run nonprofit, and we're building a children's home for girls. And I went through the proposal. They did fund the project. They funded it, I think, like $10,000, which for a building project was a drop in the bucket, but it's still a drop. But what happened is I got a hold of one of the key leaders on the phone and happened to ask a question about the proposal. Do you need it this way or do you need it that way? And she clarified. And then she said, who are you again and what do you do? And I told her about the project. If I'm writing for another organization, I said, you know, I'm with such and such children's home. Whether, you know, because I am for, you know, that 10 minutes I'm on the phone. Even though I work for a lot of different organizations when I was working as a grant writer. But I'd say I work for such and such children's home. And then I would tell them about what the need is and why unfortunately, these girls had all been rescued from human trafficking. And so we had an, you know, $200,000 security system that needed to be installed. And they couldn't understand that until I was able to explain, look, you know, their pimps are trying to get them back. They will find them. They might try to kill them, like just to send a message to the other girls. So security is got to be part of our budget. And you know, we had to build the home in the middle of the country because neighbors are going to figure it out. You know, so we had to be this big incognito thing. So I explained it to her and talking on the phone, and she literally sat there and wept on the phone saying, I never thought about it. I never thought, how do we help these girls? And I never thought about the organizations that just can't put it out publicly because then you're putting the girls at risk of security. So what happened is we had a great conversation. They gave us a grant. In December, I get a phone call. They granted us in April. She calls and she says, hey, Jenny, do you remember me from such and such foundation? I said, yes, I sure do. She goes, we had that great call in April and you made me cry in the phone. I said, oh yeah, I cried too. I cry every time I think about this girl. She says, we had money that did not get granted. Do you want it? What? So they gave us another $7,000 that was leftover funds out of all the applications they had that came in that year. They thought about me because I called and I talked to someone, and she couldn't stop thinking about the day that she talked to Jenny about those girls and what specific needs they had. That's where those relationships are going to pay off. Every year after that, we were the top grant that they considered because they were so invested emotionally into what we were doing. Relationships win grants. So if you have an opportunity to reach someone, don't belabor them, don't annoy them to death. But if you get that window of opportunity, take it, because it is precious and they can fund you every single year. And we really do need that regular funding in order to operate. All right, so let's open it up to questions. Just unmute your mic. You don't have to, you can raise your hand, but just mute your mic. It's easier.
This is Dan. A crazy question, but do you absolutely need a 501c3? It's a crazy question.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You are, yeah. If you don't have a 501c3, you can partner with somebody who does, and you can work together with them as a collaboration, and that way you can use their 501c3. But if you don't have it yourself, you should be in the process of getting it, or work with somebody that has one. And I didn't hit on this, anybody else that you can pull into your project as a collaborative partner. We have partnered with Lee University, we've partnered with other universities, we've partnered with different mental health organizations for grants, and we've been able to strengthen our proposal because we were able to get a letter from them, what we would call a letter of support. If it's a formal partnership where money's exchanged, you would do a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding and saying this amount of money will be paid. For an example, we were doing a PTSD grant, and we were working with someone who is a psychiatrist, and she's a Christian, she's a believer, she's formally part of this ministry, but she has to get paid for her services. So for those counseling hours, we wrote into the grant 20 hours a week for different folks. We wrote, she gave us what she would bill the grant, and she included that in a memorandum of understanding. So I attached that letter to the end of my grant proposal. But sometimes you can just get a letter of support from somebody. So I would say if you're working, Dan, with a church, ask them to give you a letter of support saying we are working together. And maybe it's a church that you're going to be using their conference room for counseling or whatever. It's a great benefit to them to help you, because you might be bringing people in through their doors that that you're serving. So, all right, other questions? Cheryl.
Yes, hi. I am a 501(c)(3) ministry, registered as a charitable trust, and I'm intrigued on the idea of how to bring others underneath me. I have a member who wants to start a girls' home to help with human trafficking, to help with counseling, almost everything you've said today.
Wow.
In that respect. I'm unclear, do you have to rebrand your 501(c) to have multiple ministries under you? My understanding is you have to bridge up to the next level in your 501(c), or can she literally come under just what my vision is and just add a new arm to the vision? Do I have to change a 501(c) paperwork that says I'm bringing in this whole different venue?
Okay, when you are starting small, you can put that as a subsidiary of your organization. For example, what I do falls under Freedom Outreach International. I'm a subsidiary, I'm a department in the organization, a ministry of Freedom Outreach, because I only work with children, youth, and families. I don't do all the other stuff that they do. I don't have a center, I don't do all that. So I'm a subsidiary of their organization, a DBA, doing business as. And so whenever on formal documents is Freedom Outreach International, DBA, Jacob's Generation. So yes, you don't need to go through all the paperwork to do a separate 501(c)(3). You can just set it up as a subsidiary, and then on legal documents, your DBA, so that they understand. If it's like Sunshine Children's Home, it would be the name of your trust, DBA Sunshine Children's Home.
Okay, so my understanding is that I have to reapply to alter my 501(c). I think it's like $1,000 to be able to to have those subsidiaries underneath me. Is that your understanding?
It depends on how your nonprofit is set up. And so I would suggest that you call the Foundation Center. You can call any of their branches and just ask the question. Say, I'm a nonprofit and I'm just asking this question. If they don't have somebody in the office to answer you, they will put you in touch with somebody who can answer that. And I don't want to give you information that I'm not 100% sure about. So I would say contact them. Remember that these grantmanship centers, foundation center, they exist to help you.
Okay.
So don't worry about annoying them by calling them with questions. My first year when I was starting this, I was like, I'm so sorry, I need to ask another question. They're like, that's why we're here. They're a nonprofit that exists to help you get the funding. So call them up. They have lots of free advice.
Okay, thank you.
They even have free webinars, which I encourage you when you have time to go and watch some of their free webinars. They're excellent.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Hey, you mentioned about a lot of the private foundations that would do recurring grants year after year. Is there a different procedure as far as writing a grant request that would imply, renewing every year, or do you have to submit a new grant every year?
You would have to submit a new grant every year, and your first grant is going to look a little bit more formal. When you reapply, you'll put all the same information in there, but you're also going to lean back into, because of your support last year, we were able to increase by 20% the people that we serve, or we were able to expand our food pantry and open another day a week, and putting that in there. Now, they may or may not ask for a report. A lot of family foundations don't ask for a report. Some of them, I put the report in the reapplication. I made sure that they saw the numbers. They didn't ask, but if they're going to cut somebody, they're not going to cut somebody who's very responsible with their money and tells them that we were able to do X, Y, and Z. And that also helps you give the credibility that if you said you were going to do this and you couldn't do it. I'm going to give you an example. We were supposed to do a conference that we got a grant for. That was like the Wounded Warrior type of conference. We couldn't do it because of COVID. And I'm like, I actually got a grant for something and I can't even use the grant. So frustrating because we had to cancel because of COVID. But I went back to them and said, you gave us this for travel, for renting the facility, for honorariums for our speakers. I can't use it for that because we're having to do it a virtual event. Is there any way you would consider letting me buy equipment and software? And they did. And so we got 3 cameras out of it. We got a bunch of editing equipment. If you've been a part of our ministry, we've done some really excellent online conferences because we had about 10 days to figure out how to learn to use all of that. But the grant did pay for it. So praise God for that. So yeah, when you have the relationship and the credibility, you can go back and ask them to make changes to your budget. But I caution you this. Have you heard of the term misappropriation of funds? You can go to jail for that. Don't take something that's on one line item and spend it for something else without written permission from the foundation. Do not do it. It is unethical and in many cases is illegal. If you need to make a change, get permission. Even if they say on the phone, yeah, oh, of course, it's no problem. Say, would you please just humor me and send me an email and just so I've got it for my records. They understand that way that you've got that in your file saying they allowed you to, because your ministry van broke down and you needed to repair it. So you took money out of this program and used it for that. So that is something else that you need to be considerate of with budgets. But when you have the relationship with the funders, you're reapplying, you're sending in your numbers, whether they asked for it or not. And you're writing that in your reapplication that, this has been extremely successful. However, now that people know that we're a resource for this, I'm going to use benevolence. If you have a food pantry, saying, yes, we were able to feed 250 families weekly last year, families that are in the very low income bracket. However, because it's been so successful, now we have 50 new families that we can't integrate. So thanks for helping us be successful, but the need is growing. Would you consider maybe a little bit more of an increase? And sometimes the one foundation I give you the example of in the beginning of the Uncle Joe Foundation, we did get up to 35,000. We started with 25, we got up to 35, but it took about 6 years to get there of recurring grants. And I was able to explain cost of living increase but we also added in some transportation funds and said, would you consider $2,500 a year of fuel reimbursement to that person? And they did include it. So, but they did because we were so responsible with their money and we kept accountable to them even when they didn't ask. Make an electronic calendar for yourself with all these reminders, because there will come up times that you're like, I need to send that report, and you realize it's due on Thursday and it's Wednesday night. You're like, oh man, I don't have time for this. Make sure that you're giving yourself 2 weeks before you have to have something done. And that reminder is going to come up and bug you until you get it done. Because a lot of folks, you just want to do it. You don't want to have to do all the reports and stuff. But if we don't get our reports done, they're not going to continue to fund us. So,
Hey, Jenny, I think I said your name right. Or Jeannie, is it Jeannie or Jenny?
no, it's Jenny, Jennifer. Yeah.
So
Don't call me Jennifer unless I'm in trouble, though.
all right. This is more or less a business type question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but can a 501c3 fall under an LLC?
No, you will have to get separate nonprofit determination letter. The LLC can be a collaborator with your 501c3, but it needs to be a standalone. Because of the nonprofit and the for-profit, they just can't be in the same bathwater. They need to be completely separate from each other. They're like oil and water. They can't mix because it gets into all sorts of trouble. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Miss Jenny, sorry, Sean over here.
Mhm.
So I work with broadcasting. We broadcast across the Middle East and North Africa. We tend to do things like full-fledged movies, but also spots against human trafficking, alcoholism, a number of things. However, because we switch back and forth across what we do, part of my concern with some of these grants are, do they tend more towards things that are tangible, whereas we kind of represent something that's a little bit more intangible?
No, I don't think so. Of course, some foundations like to be able to look at something and say, we built that, we funded this. And so when it's intangible, it's a little bit harder of a sell, but it's not like you would fall under like tech. I suppose you probably need a lot of funds for technology and things like that. So you could go to certain, even corporate foundations that only fund, they're tech foundations, Hewlett Packard. There's like any business that has their hand in technology, they have a foundation that's going to be able to give you some funds or at least consider your project. And I would just research closely what exactly they're interested in, and you can say, here's the impact of what we do. This is why it's a good cause, and you're able to show that to them. You're also, because you're broadcasting in many different areas, you're able to look at like foundations. I'm just going to use this hypothetically. Bill and Melinda Gates, they made all their money from technology. They also send almost all of their money overseas. So they do. And to human services and things overseas. So if you can prove a human service aspect, you've already got the in with the technical part. So you're able to put that to their foundation. They do a lot more in the medical field, but you're able to put that to their foundation and kind of tick some boxes that is going to make it more interesting for them, your project, than somebody who's out in left field.
Okay, sorry, a follow-up question then to
Yeah.
that. how creative do you, I've never written grants before, so how creative are you in bridging the gap between their understanding and what you do? For instance, we have a couple of spots that we broadcast across the Middle East that are anti-abuse, anti-alcoholism. And you might have somebody who's like, hey, well, we do social justice, for instance. Well, you might not be a one-to-one match to them, but depending on how you creatively word something, you could,
Yes.
not out and out lie, but how creative can you be? What sort of license can you have with that?
Well, you need to, and I something I usually say, and I didn't say this time, is data sells grants. If you can say we're broadcasting to these 3 countries, this is the percentage of domestic violence and or whatever it is that you're going to be addressing in that broadcast in these areas. For example, one of the organizations I've worked with is Lee Grady's ministry, which is works with women in countries where they are not allowed education and they're often abused, especially if you're like a Christian in a Muslim country. Oftentimes they're not allowed to have an education, or the girls are raped, so they're never going to be legally allowed to marry, things like that. They work specifically with that group. And so we would have to take the demographics of that area, break it down, and say, okay, a minority population is being assaulted, and here's the numbers. Here's where we got the numbers. Every bit of data has to be qualified. One of the organizations I worked with would always say, we have about this many, minority folks coming. I'm like, where did you pull that number from? Oh, just basic information that I know. I'm like, nope, I'm not putting that in a grant. If you can't qualify the numbers don't go in the grant. You need to tell them absolutely how you know where your numbers came from and that they're current. It's not from 2001. It's from 2020 or whatever, the most current data you can get. However, with that said, if you've got different kinds of data coming from different areas, and you can say, well, one says, this study says this and this study says that. Use the study that works best for you. Did you take statistics in college? Use a statistic that works best for you to get your grant funded. And so often I would look at what the federal numbers were, excuse me, because I didn't have access to what it is right in that community. They may or may not come back and say, but what are the domestic violence numbers for that area? Well, I don't have those numbers right now. There's not been money to research that. And so it's really difficult, especially if you're in something that's very groundbreaking. You're going to have to tell them we don't have that information because nobody else is doing what we're doing. That's why we have to give you these specific numbers like this. But yeah, just get the data, and I recommend for every single person, everybody needs data in their grants. You need to be able to tell them why it matters. And also don't forget that you're getting the demographic, data and the, data for whatever risk factors there are. Also tell them about other nonprofits that are doing what you're doing in your area. Nobody ever wants to put that in a grant. Put it in there because they're already questioning, hey, isn't there another, if you're a children's home, there's another children's home in that area. I don't think we need to fund both of them, or we'll just pick the one that we already know. Tell them about why you're different. I would say nobody else in the state was working with trafficked girls. That's why there's 20 different children's homes, but we're the only one that are taking trafficked girls, and we have to do almost one-on-one mentorship because they're so high risk. There's no higher risk group that we worked with. And so then they understood, oh man, you really need the funds. And so we knew we were competing with other children's homes, but they had to see why we were so unique. So if you can't sell it to yourself, you're not going to sell it to them. Tell them why you're the best, why they should give you the money instead of somebody else. But make sure that they know that you're aware there's others in the community. If you can collaborate. The homeless organization in DC that I worked with collaborated with at least a dozen other churches. They were working with them, and they were all working together. They said, this is a problem for our community. It's not one organization's problem. So she was able to show in her grants of the executive director, she was able to list all 12 churches that were working with them for the food pantry. And it was just, that's what a funder wants to see. You're not a lone ranger. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're working with your community. You're the best investment they can make with their grant dollars. All right, other questions?
Question, Jen. So the suggestion on how to position what we do into the professional program that they're going to understand. So for example, I do 200 counseling hours a month as pastoral care, and I'm licensed as a Church of God minister. I'm licensed as a Church of God chaplain. I've been licensed with the Marketplace chaplaincy. I have a gift of counseling, but from the ministry side, you cannot use the word counseling because I'm not a licensed therapist in the, in professional society. So is there a way to, I mean, I'm helping, the majority of people I'm helping are women who have been sexually abused and molested and abused verbally, and bringing him through some, multiple personality situations, some just detrimental, blah, blah, blah. So is there a way to position, I mean, is that grant worthy, or is that, how do I?
It is absolutely grant worthy. I would start with looking at like the numbers of people and the variety of issues that have been brought to you. And the second thing I would look at, like the prevalence of these issues in your area, any data that you can get. The third thing I would do is to research other people who are doing the same thing, whether they're in your neighborhood or not. What I did when I worked for St. Francis, I looked at other large child welfare nonprofit, Boys and Girls Town, different places. I read through everything they put out that was pertaining to my project because I wanted to borrow their verbiage. There's other people that are doing what you're doing, and they found a way to put the verbiage out there that says, instead of saying what you're not, I'm not a licensed counselor, I'm not a clinical professional,
Exactly.
I'm not this.
Exactly.
Don't tell them all the stuff you're not,
Right.
Tell them all the stuff you are, and
Okay.
be able to, the words you have to omit, you're going to fill with something else that's going to help them understand without getting yourself into trouble with saying this and
Right.
that.
Okay. Awesome.
I don't steal other people's verbiage. I borrow their ideas. I'm not plagiarizing. I'm just borrowing, like, hey, that's an interesting way to say that, and just the way that they're able to present themselves, I can present the same way without plagiarizing. So.
Finding others' wordsmithing that works for you.
And even the way that they presented it, where there's a lot of psychology that goes into how we read and how they presented it and transitioned into, like, here's the demographic, here's the issue, here's our solution. You can just see, oh, that was a beautiful way to present it. And you can think, oh yeah, we need to transition that way, and just, where you're going to weave in little threads of emotion, but not make it sappy and emotional. It's a professional document. But if there's no emotion, people are going to get really weary reading something that dry. But you just get inspired, I would say, by other people and how they've been able to present. Also, when sometimes there's winning grants that are posted online. You can actually go and read other people's grants and say, oh, that one. Some of the big foundations like Lilly Endowment, they actually do post some of the winning grants that you can go and read the proposal and say, that's why that one, man, that was good. I hope I can write that good someday. Or if I would have put it this way, here's another rule of thumb. Don't ever leave a question in a funder's mind. If you're not saying something because you don't want them to ask a question, like maybe you didn't serve anybody last year because of COVID and you don't want to tell them that, so you left out the whole thing, all that data from last year, they're going to stop and have a question mark, like, why don't we hear anything about what they were doing during the COVID crisis? Go ahead and address it, even if it doesn't look the best for you. Just put it in the best light possible. When you leave questions in their minds, they realize, here's my proposal, and here's 5 questions I need to follow up and ask them. Or I can just take this proposal over here and fund it and be done. They're going to fund somebody else. They're not going to spend the time to go back and ask you the questions that you didn't answer. So you need to preemptively answer their questions before they ask them. Imagine yourself, if you've never heard of the organization, what would your questions be? Read your proposal to some poor unwitting soul, like for me, my husband, like, how does this sound to you? Or to somebody at my church and say, you don't know anything about the ministry I do, so I'm gonna ask you to read this proposal. What questions would you have? They're like, well, I don't understand why the chapel's not doing that. You know, oh, I forgot to tell you that. You know, I thought everybody understood the line between the chapel and our ministry into the military. So there's just like, there's things that I forget because it's so familiar to me. That I didn't explain. So I'll have somebody who doesn't know anything read a grant proposal. I'm like, I will take you out to the best lunch you've had all week. But I need you to read this grant and give me some feedback. And that also brings somebody over to say, man, I love what you guys are doing. Just bring somebody else into your corner. So.
And is it inappropriate to provide trinkets or some kind of marketing benefit to a grant proposal, or is it just straight paperwork? Straight
paperwork. They will frown upon you sending anything with it. They sometimes will tell you, don't send a video. So they don't want that sort of information. I tell you what, our videos, a 5-minute video, and you'll want to give your life savings to our ministry when you see those kids and you hear their own testimonies, but they don't want it. So instead we'll put it on our website, we'll put it on our social media, and we'll say, if you have time to visit our website, we have some wonderful testimonials there. Oftentimes, they frown upon it. And in fact, some of them will just not, they will not consider your proposal if you do that. So it seems logical. Save that for your donors.
Okay.
Okay, we've got some other folks here. We still have quite a few on the call.
I just want to say thanks so much, Jenny. You've done a great job, and I really appreciate your time that you've given to us. I've learned so much, and I've taken a class that I paid a hefty amount for at the United Way. I feel I've learned more in an hour and a half than that class. Aww. Although it was a great class, but I appreciate your time and willingness to help.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to shove as much information in as I can fit and make it an information sausage and feed it to you. And that's, 2 hours, take 2 weeks of information. But that's why I gave out my my Gmail and my phone number. I really care about helping people. I have been in the position where you're just like, I'm at a loss. I don't know I don't even know who to ask. And if I did, I wouldn't know what to ask them. So just don't be afraid to ask anything. There's no such thing as a dumb question, because it's information is power. And I want to see some of these funds that are going towards horrible causes, just things that we would say that is just wrong, that they're well funded. Let's get some of that for our causes instead. It's out there. It's just because people have been so scared of grants, or it's been such a, they're so mystified by it that they have given up on trying to get grants. So don't give up. My ministry is probably the hardest one in the world that I know of to get grants for. And we still sometimes win grants, not very often, but sometimes we do. Most of your causes are much more grantable. So.
Awesome.
All right. Any other questions before we stop our recording?
Yes, Jenny, I have not really a question, but a request.
Okay.
Because of your success and longevity, and you're still engaged in this. Before we close, would you pray for all of us that are on this call? And we'd appreciate your support that way as well.
Yes, definitely, of course. Father, I thank you that you care about these things, Lord. I thank you that you have led us, Lord, on a road less traveled. We understand that there's not a lot of Christian ministries, Lord, that go for grants. And Lord, we want to turn the tide of the funding. We want to aim it towards your kingdom, Lord. We thank you, Lord, that there are doors that have not opened only because we didn't knock on that door. And so we're knocking, Lord. We're asking, Lord, that you would direct us towards the funders, Lord, that will help us. Keep us from going down rabbit trails and dead ends, Lord, and really give us the backbone to stick with the process, because it is a long and arduous process. Lord, we're doing this for your kingdom's sake. We're asking for your blessing, your guidance, your favor, Lord. We thank you that your favor, Lord, isn't fair. It's going to give us an unfair advantage, Lord, where you're going to take funding from an ungodly cause and fund our ministries instead. So we thank you for that transfer, Lord. We pray, God, for clarity of vision, Lord. Even in the process of writing down the grants and the budget, you're going to solidify and clarify and hone that vision down. Lord, I thank you for that. I thank you for helping us, God, to build a team that we can get one person looking up demographics and one person researching and another person doing some of the writing, Lord, and another person on the phone. Father, I pray that you surround us with the people that will help us in this critical work. And we thank you, Lord, that in the end, Lord, it's going to be your kingdom come and your will being done just as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and close this, but I do want to encourage you to reach out at any time. Just gives me a lot of joy to help folks. And if I can, I will. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll send you the recording. Send you the recording link and also the grant handbook, and we'll hear from you soon. God bless.
Bless you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.